Afrikili family, Global PAC Nation, welcome to the Global PAC Show. Take any of the current political news, events, stories, and you will get widely diverging views depending on whose opinion you are seeking. For example, let's look at Donald Trump's latest bill. Well, it is either the most beautiful bill ever created in the history of mankind or the ugliest bill and most devastating bill in the history of human politics. Take, for example, the peace deal that was negotiated, or at least presented as a peace deal, signed in Washington last week between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda, which was touted by Donald Trump as one of the greatest peace deals that will finally bring peace in a region, the Great Lakes region, so in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a conflict that has lasted for over 30 years. Well, depending on whose opinion you seek, that is either the greatest peace agreement that would really bring peace, or it is the biggest surrender and abdication of a nation in terms of giving away its sovereignty or its mineral deal. I'm talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo. Look at the current conflict that's happening where Israel every day is killing innocent Palestinians in Gaza. Depending on who you seek, either it is an atrocious genocide or it is simply Israel that is exercising its right of self-defense. So, how is it that we're arriving at such diametrically opposed points of views on the same stories? At the end of the day, are we really in control of our political views? Or is there someone, somewhere, that is really shaping what we believe in when it comes to voting, how we vote, or even how we see each other when it comes to politics, but also life in general? Well, what if I told you that the news that we consume so much in this 24/7 news cycle, or the headlines, or the videos that we consume, what if they were actually not a window into the world as they claim to be, but rather what if they were a stage that was carefully set to manipulate our opinions? Well, today we'll talk about that. More specifically, we'll talk about media propaganda. We'll talk about how to combat it and how to stop outsourcing our thinking to forces that are seeking to manipulate us, because at the end of the day, the remote control is in our hand and we have the ability to counter that manipulation. So that is what we'll talk about today. Let's fasten our seatbelts, let's dive in, and let's get to work. Afrikili family, Global PAC Nation, welcome again to another edition of the Global PAC Show. This is Tony Mfumusimba Kwambambangumbo. Thank you very much to all of you that are continuing to support our platform ever since we launched our Global PAC Show concept in January. Thank you so much for your support. For those of you who have not done so, let me ask you to just take a moment to please click on the subscribe button. It only takes a second, but it allows you to become part of this growing community as we reach out for the goals that we set for ourselves in 2025. So thank you very much for your support. As a reminder, if you're new on this platform, the Global PAC Show, Global PAC, PAC stands for Pan-African Community. So here we're talking about bringing together communities, building bridges, and building strong coalitions with people across the global Pan-African community. So people of African descent, whether it's African-American communities in the United States, Black immigrants, we're talking about Caribbeans, we're talking about people of African descent in Latin America, we're talking about Asia, Europe. So we believe that by building strong bridges and strong coalitions between people of African descent, or the Africa heritage people, as Malcolm X once called them, we have the ability to build such strong coalitions that will help advance issues of equity, change the narrative, and allow all of us to get to a world that is truly equal for all of us, regardless of race and origins. That is our goal in this platform. So before we get started again, thank you so much to all of you that are supporting this platform. I really it's important for me to do that before we start, to showcase how thankful I am for the support that you continue showing through our platform. So thank you for that. All right, folks, that being said, let's go straight into it. It's been a while, right, since we did our last live. I mean, I think it's been close to a week. Well, before we get into our topic, today's topic is hot fire. I mean, that whole stuff with media propaganda, you'll see that some stuff that you think it might be insulated, but maybe, maybe in a way, we might all be subject to at least some form of influence with what's happening there. But let's start with a quick roundup. We'll just do a quick roundup of what's happening across the global PAC world. So the global Pan-African communities. So let's go ahead and starting with, we'll start with the Caribbean. So what's happening in the Caribbean? Well, from the 6th to the 8th, there was the CARICOM Summit. So the CARICOM Summit, CARICOM stands for Caribbean Community. You know, that's the bloc that has within it about 15 people of African, 15 Caribbean nation. Well, they met in Montego Bay, Jamaica, to discuss issues pertaining to the Caribbean. And so the meeting ended on the 8th. So that was a Tuesday. Many great things were discussed during that meeting. But amongst some of the heavy topics, talked about the ongoing issue in Haiti. I mean, in this show, we've talked numerous times about what's happening in Haiti. The gang violence, how it is estimated that maybe 85% of the capital city, for example, Port-au-Prince, is under the hands of gangs, right? So it's a lot of violence that's unfolding there. So the different Caribbean leaders came together to discuss how to address that situation. But one of the most important things, in my opinion, well, actually two things that came out of this CARICOM summit, which again was held in Jamaica in Montego Bay. The first topic of the many topics, but I find very, very interesting and important for the long-term future, has to do with the free movement of people in the Caribbean bloc. Now, this is an issue that has been ongoing for a while. Till this point, you know, all the different nations in the Caribbean have not really identified the proper model on how to establish a free movement of people in their zone. But we strongly believe within this platform that having a strong Caribbean bloc that can actually negotiate and that can present a unified voice in the international geopolitical space is of capital importance for the people of the Caribbean. Because when it comes to negotiating, say, trade deals or things of that nature, when individual nations come at the negotiation table, individual Caribbean nation, try to negotiate with, say, the United States or other powerful blocs like the European bloc, one single nation does not weigh a lot on the scale. But being able to negotiate as an entire bloc brings a lot more power, a lot more influence. And so just like we're advocating for a free zone across the African continent, is a free zone within the Caribbean is of crucial importance. So I really hope that over time, the Caribbean nations will be able to put together that model so that they can truly create a singular bloc that will give them more power economically, but also politically on the international stage. Actually, just on the face of that, the second thing I wanted to mention is that, you know, there's a report that just came out, which was presented at the CARICOM, and this report says that the Caribbean will suffer heavy blows from Donald Trump's tariffs. You know, Donald Trump with his chaotic trade, tariff policy, one day turns it on, the next day turns it off. But all that chaos, there's a report that came out that was funded by institutions like the World Bank. There's also the umbrella Caribbean private sector organization called the CPSO. Well, according to this report, it says that the Caribbean bloc will likely suffer about $550 million in losses because of the tariff imposed by the Donald Trump's administration in the coming years. Projected about $550 million, because you have many different nations that export a lot of stuff to the U.S. and so on. Trinidad and Tobago is projected to be the nation that would suffer the most, for example. Well, this just goes to reemphasize what I was talking about right before this topic, the importance of having a singular bloc, a singular Caribbean bloc. Because one thing that the Caribbean is suffering from, just like the African continent, is that the intra-Caribbean trade, so trade between the different Caribbean nations, is underutilized. The capacity is not met. Whereas if true channels of partnerships were set up within Caribbean nation, policies put in place for, again, the free movement of people and goods across the Caribbean, right, to strengthen internal trade, as a whole, the Caribbean would be so much stronger than it is today. Which is why, it behooves our global PAC leaders in the Caribbean to continue striving for that. Nations understand our concept that over the centuries become ingrained in the fabric of citizens of that place. Whereas nations can be are a very substantial, subjective thing anyways. But I understand that over time, the concept of nation becomes so ingrained in the cultures that people think that there are actual borders and separation to prevent sometimes people from interacting. They're not. It is something that can be overcome through time, I understand, but it's something that really the Caribbean nation need to continue striving for. Because a strong CARICOM is a strong base for the entire global PAC, the global Pan-African community. So we're talking about, again, people of African descent. So we'll continue following this story. All right, let's jump into the African continent. Well, with relation to that, we have in Kenya. In Kenya, there's been several protests, unrest. A few weeks ago, we talked about the protest that came after the blogger who was arrested and was killed in jail. And as he was killed in jail, initially the police said that he hit his head, and then it turns out that he was actually beat up by police officers in jail. And so after his death, there were many protests and so on across Kenya, and then it followed on. So until this day, there's still protests across the country. Well, the president is very defined. William Ruto, who's the president of Kenya. Kenya is a country in the eastern part of Africa. Because now the protesters are requesting that he steps down. Because after the death of the blogger, I apologize, I forgot his name. I should have remembered his name. But after his death, people continue protesting in the street. And it led into the 1-year anniversary of a massive protest that happened last year, which was like an anti-tax protest, right? So people continue staying in the street, and it just ramped up. And then the police happened to shoot somebody in close range during one of the protests, and the situation just blew up again. That was like putting fuel over fire, and it hasn't stopped. Well, now the president, who's so defined, literally said, gave permission to the police to shoot people in the legs. Can you imagine? That's some crazy stuff. The Kenyan president saying that if these protesters continue, he's allowed his police officer to shoot people in the legs because he will not permit the destruction of property and so on, because he's accusing people of looting and so on. He's saying people will be shot in the legs. And he said he doesn't care what kind of names they assign to him, but police has the right of doing that in Kenya. And people on the other side are saying they will not relent. So right now in Nairobi, which is the capital city of Kenya, you have roadblocks throughout the city. It's a lot of unrest. It's an unfortunate situation. But this is, a case of a people who understand that politicians are their servant at the end of the day. There could be some manipulation, maybe, from some people wanting to gain from this political unrest, maybe. But it just goes to show you, when people are determined, we've seen that throughout history. I mean, when people are organized and determined, they eventually have the ability to topple unjust political forces. I'm not saying that's necessarily what's happening in Kenya, but this should just be another illustration for everybody around the world who might be facing injustice from a political system that abuses them, that might think that change is not possible. No. Through organization, the power of the people, as an expression goes, right, that the people have represent the power of God in a sense. Right, when a population, its citizenship is organized, no political force can really resist. But organization, unity is required for true change to happen. With relation to Africa again, well, this story actually made me very, very happy in a sense, because we have Angelique Kidjo, Mama Africa. So if you with her, she's a singer originally from Benin, who was given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. So she becomes the first Black African artist to be given a star. Los Angeles, there is the Boulevard, and stars over the years, stars who have accomplished significant things are given a star, right? And so on the pavement, so a star is drawn, is put with entertainer's name. So you have hundreds of stars. Well, I was so happy to see that Angelique Kidjo, originally from Benin, used to be called Mama Africa, was given a star. That's great news. Very, very happy to see that. She's a real trailblazer. If you're not familiar with her music, probably a lot of the new generation don't know anything about Angelique Kidjo, unfortunately, but she is an icon, a real icon of African music. I strongly encourage you to seek her out. Okay, continuing with news concerning Africans in Greece. Well, what did Greece do? There's an island called Crete, all right, C-R-E-T in Greece, where a lot of migrants who come from Africa land on an island on their attempt to enter the European Union. So Greece has seen a significant increase in migrants reaching that region. And so Greece decided to suspend all asylum application. And asylum means that as those migrants arrive on the island, they were seeking political asylum. So in other words, saying that, please take us in because we're fleeing some kind of persecution or something from where we come from. And so when you're accepted, you're provided political asylum, right? Which is why Donald Trump interrupted in the US, for example, when he said that the country was being invaded at the border. Well, Greece, that has seen an increase of about 350% of migrant arrivals since the beginning of the year, an increase of 350%, decided to suspend the political asylum process for migrants, from North Africa. Now, I should say here, yes, the news is presented as being migrants just fleeing from Africa, from North Africa, but you have to understand that you have a lot of people that even come from Asia and other places that come all the way to Africa, to North Africa, with smugglers, and then smugglers figure out how to put them on boats and try to have them cross into Europe, either by going through Spain, by Italy, or Greece. So you have different routes for migrants that way. So yeah, but Greece suspended that. But here, well, the main reason I'm even bringing this up is that, I think I've mentioned many times on this platform that it's just a shame that a continent with so much potential, once again, the African continent, that literally could feed the entire world, a continent that has all the the natural resources to be the richest continent in the world. It's not even close. To see that such a continent is communicating such a lack of hope for its young population, as to where the youth feels like the only hope is to leave the continent and go somewhere else, is just very sad. That's one of the many reasons why within this platform we'll continue, again, advocating for coalitions and building bridges within the global PAC, the global Pan-African communities. Because look, we need to be able to pull our resources together, our minds, work together to elevate that continent. That continent is way too rich to continue in its trajectory. Yes, a lot of good things are happening. Africa is not all negative. I get it. There's a lot of great stories and a lot of positive stories coming out of Africa. That being said, we cannot discount the negative stories also. We cannot discount the suffering. We cannot discount some of the chronic corruption from some elites that are hoarding the riches of that continent and working hand in hand with exploitative multinationals that just come to pillage the continent. No, that cannot continue. But to change the status quo, just like I was talking about the Caribbean, how the CARICOM needs to come together, right, to weigh heavier on the scale, African countries need to come together to be able to speak with one voice when it comes to negotiations, when it comes to deals and so on, so that it can negotiate mutually beneficial deals when it comes to mining and all these other trade deals across the continent, because it is clearly not the case today. And over time, that will need to change. All right, so for how long have we been going here? I didn't want the show to last too long today, 22 minutes already. All right, let's finish quickly with a quick roundup in the United States of America, and then we'll go straight into our propaganda story. I know probably many of you are waiting for that. It should be a very, very interesting one, our discussion on propaganda today. Well, just a couple of stories about the United States. Donald Trump yesterday welcomed 5 African presidents into the White House because he's starting his 3 days African summit. Well, you had president from the 5 countries. Let me remember properly. So you had the president of Gabon, which is in Central Africa. You had the president of Guinea-Bissau. You have the president of Senegal, Bassirou Diomaye Faye. You have the president of Mauritania, which is in West Africa, towards Morocco and so on. And then the president of Liberia, West Africa, 5 president. And there's another controversy because as this president came in, as we were talking, Donald Trump, once again, displayed his utter ignorance, his paternalistic views, his condescension towards fellow president. Because as the Liberian president was talking, Mr. President Joseph Boakai, as he's talking, you should watch the video. Donald Trump surprised, but he's English. Start praising him. Wow, you speak English so well. Where were you educated? It was a moment of utter dismay. So Donald Trump, listen, you know those meetings, right? On one side you have Donald Trump, on the other side you have vice president, which again goes into what I was saying before, how these tiny nations are coming to negotiate individual. But anyways, Donald Trump, of all points of praise, praises English and asks him where you were educated. So this obviously shows that, again, you have somebody who's coming here at this meeting totally unprepared, because you cannot tell me that his aides, while preparing for this meeting, didn't prepare material with regards to who the visitors were, right? You're welcoming people for trade discussions. You should know a little bit about them. I'm pretty sure till this day, if you give Donald Trump a map and ask him, where is Liberia? Where is Mauritania? Look, where is Guinea-Bissau? I'm pretty sure the guy will have no idea where those countries are. As he's told us many, many times, for him that these nations are shithole countries, right? I don't think his level of respect has changed with regards to those nations. But that's just showcasing, once again, the lack of respect. And you should have seen those presidents, the way they're praising Donald Trump. All of them, yes, we've recommended you for the Nobel Peace Prize. Because it has become custom. Everybody knows that if you come to the White House now, you have to butter Donald Trump. You have to praise him a bit. So now it's like the custom. We saw Bibi Netanyahu come in and just praising him with the letter that he recommended to the Nobel Peace Prize so that Trump would become a Nobel Peace Prize laureate and so on. So that's the norm now. Donald Trump is sitting there and just enjoys all that, all that buttering. But it's like, it's just unbelievable, quite frankly, to see what is required now when you visit the White House. But anyways, that was very embarrassing though, and that was so disrespectful to. It's as if somebody coming from Africa could not speak English. And here's the other funny part: is like, if it was another country, I could maybe understand in certain settings. But we're talking about Liberia, a country that is so closely tied to the U.S. If you look at the Liberian flag, Liberians call the U.S. flag the Big Brother because it's a similar flag. Because Liberia, the nation with the name, that concept was founded when you had freed black slaves through some racist, conniving, scheming plans, were removed from the United States, sent back to Africa, and were sent to the country of Liberia, creating Freetown and so on. So it's a country. So you obviously had the locals, but then you had the free slaves that were sent in Liberia. And that also created a lot of animosity because you had these free slaves that had been in the U.S. for generations. So creating different mindset and so on, coming into Liberia, brought with certain advantages and so on, and then utilized that to start overpowering the locals. And so that created a lot of resentment and tension over time that erupted into a very bloody civil war where over 250,000 people were killed during the civil war in Liberia. So it's a country that is very closely tied to the U.S. But obviously, leave it to Donald Trump to not know anything about that. Now, that's unfortunate. All right, the last story about the U.S. that I will go into, this to me was very interesting because it goes hand in hand with the pillar of our platform. There's a bank called Redemption Bank, which just became the first black-owned bank in the Rocky Mountains in the western part of the United States. This is an area, the western part of the United States was called as a black bank desert. So if you go between Houston and Los Angeles, you really had a shortage of black banks going west. Houston is a city in Texas where I am, and then obviously going west towards Los Angeles. And so this bank becomes the first black-owned bank in the western part of the United States. The reason why to me this is relevant is because the VP, the vice president of corporate strategy of that bank, happens to be Miss Bernice King. And Miss Bernice King is the youngest child of the late Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. So this is just a fascinating thing for me. And so the president, the CEO of the bank is Ashley Bell, who had worked under President Barack Obama. So the bank will be based in Salt Lake City in Utah, and we'll plan to serve, different communities across the United States. It's starting with assets of about $67 million. It's not a huge bank. It's the beginning. We hope that it will grow. But this, for me, this is a fantastic story because this platform, as you know, has three pillars, right? We have Pan-African business, Pan-African political action, and Pan-African history. Those are the three pillars we try to advance. Well, Pan-African business, so business related to the global PAC, people of African descent across the world, is such a strong pillar because finances are essential. As they say, money talks, bullshit walks. You can have all the great ideas in the world. We can go with all the activism that we want. But ultimately, we'll need to also strengthen our economic power, right? And see this confluence here, because we have the name King, right, from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Well, is there a name that epitomizes activism and, the fight for freedom more than that in the U.S.? I think not. So the name speaks for itself, for what it stands for, right? Activism, political implication, and so on. And then now combine that with the economic angle, which we're talking about a bank here, designed to advance, to just help facilitate business for minorities and communities that are underserved. Fantastic combination of factors here. And this is the sort of change we need to scale going forward. I mean, again, I understand some people will say, well, you guys are stuck in the past. Look across the U.S., you have black people owning businesses, you have billionaires, Robert Smith, and so on and so forth. So this is an equal country. We know better than that. Right? The scales are still heavily skewed. And so we need more and more of this type of effort to the point where we can really arrive to true economic equality. Because for the political changes that we seek to be implemented, you need to have the money. Look at the guy making all the noise, Elon Musk. If he's able to have such an influence, he obviously has the money, the richest man in the world. Without the money, he would not have nearly any political influence. So those two things go hand in hand. All right, so this is it for the roundup. Our roundup took quite a long time. I understand 30 minutes. All right, let's go now straight into our topic for today. Propaganda. Folks, you might think that you were immune to political propaganda. You might think that, I know that the media manipulates people, but not me. I'm in control of all my faculty. I'm too smart, to be subject to that. Before we get started, let me just present these books, and let me just tell you that it is a real thing. All right. Political propaganda is a real thing. I recommend these books. You don't have to get them. You don't have to read them. But these books might change your view of political media manipulation, of propaganda. The first book here is called Propaganda, right? The Public Mind in the Making. This is by Edward Bernays, called the father of public opinion, public relation. This is a fascinating book about the psychology behind, media, political manipulation. I strongly recommend it. It's an older book, but the psychology is still very relevant today. This book was written, I think, in the early 20th century, 1920 something. So beginning 20th century, awesome book. All right. There's also a slightly older book called The Crowd. All right. I ordered the newest version because I just wanted to see the updates. It's the newer version has the psychology of the crowd, but it's the same book written by Gustave Le Bon. This one is slightly older compared to a Bernays book. This one was written at the end of the end of the 20th century. But wait, the other one was written in 19. Yeah, so this Propaganda was written in the beginning of the 20th century. This one was written at the end of the 19th century by Gustave Le Bon. The Psychology of the Crowd talks about the same principle of propaganda and manipulation. The other book, now this one I have not fully read. I'm in the process of reading it. It's called Influence. This is much newer, right? This is by Robert Cialdini. It's a massive book. But the reason I'm presenting this, and this, the little that I've started reading, fascinating book. I can't wait to finish this. Is because, a lot of the media that we consume today, rest assured that the powers that be that are controlling the narratives are very, very familiar with this principle of propaganda. So my goal today that I want to do, I will do it if we're not able to finish it in one Sure, I might need to come back and finish it in another topic because it's already been 35 minutes since we started. I might cut it in two. Let's just see how it goes. My goal is to really provide a roadmap, which I think is necessary. A roadmap or a guide to really help us understand the manipulation tactics that are utilized by the media, because rest assured, that is the case. Remember in the introduction, I asked you, how is it that if you take any topic, right? Any topic in current news today, or, headline news, whatever. There's always a headline here and there. Something critical. Take any current event story, especially when it comes to politics. Just seek the opinion, and people who are getting their source from a certain media source will have sometimes a totally diametrically opposed viewpoint from somebody who's getting it from another source. Let me just say, for example, there's an international news channel called Al Jazeera. You take a topic, let's just talk about Israel and Palestine, because it's something that's out there in the news a lot. The news that you consume from Al Jazeera, totally different from the news you will consume from, say, CNN or France 24 in France, or BBC or what's not. Totally different. So people who get the news from those channels will have a totally different interpretation of the same thing. Why is that? If news are supposed to, at the end of the day, just be a window into the world, how is it possible? And so we will talk about the tactics. So the way I want to divide this, first, we will just talk about the problem, actually, what this problem is, and then I'll break down some of the tactics that are being utilized so that we're cognizant of that, and then I'll provide a roadmap on how we can counter that, and then become experts at that, because even as we advance our cause, like say this platform, we have very specific goals that we're targeting. Our mission, we want to build bridges and coalitions within the global pack, right? Strong bridges and coalitions. To do that, we need to be able to present the narrative in a way that advances that mission while staying in the truth. So, and other movements out there need to understand how these strategies work and utilize it, hopefully, in a way to advance truthful causes, because it can definitely be used in a negative way. Not to digress too much. Remember how Fox News, for example, was sued. Fox News, the massive news outlet in the United States owned by Rupert Murdoch, was sued after the election of Donald Trump, right? When he lost the election, because now Fox News kept advancing misinformation about Trump winning the election, about this company that was apparently involved in rigging the votes. But Fox News continued advancing that story because it got them clicks and views. And so they had different incentives. They had the bottom line incentive. So the more they advanced it, the more ratings went up, and it helped them bottom line. But they were sued for that, and they had to pay a fine. So media outlets are utilizing this tactic, and we need to be cognizant of that if we want to be able to counter that. Look at Israel, for example, the conflict that's happening in Gaza. What do you think that Israel does not let an independent reporter into the conflict zone? Why? They just don't. They want to control all the narrative coming out. There's a reason for that. If the media was not a powerful tool, it would not be controlled as such. The control of narrative and the control of information, the framing of information, is critical and capital when it comes to creating certain public opinion, shaping public opinion, manipulating public opinion. So just to give you the weight of this, right? So according to the World Economic Forums, they have a report that came up in 2025. It's called the Global Risk Report. Well, they have called misinformation the biggest threat to political unity and social cohesion. The biggest threat. Just tell you that the media has such an immense power to shape our political view, right? by using all these, clever and psychological tactics. So it is a massive, massive problem. So when I talk about media manipulation, so maybe starting by defining the term, right? So you might say, okay, what exactly am I talking about when I'm talking about media manipulation? Well, it is a very, very precise toolkit of method. So media manipulation, so it goes from carefully chosen, images to text, that is emotionally charged. That is all designed to steer public opinion. So that's what we call media manipulation. Again, it is a toolkit of methods that is designed to steer public opinion. All right. And this, unfortunately, as I mentioned with the report, this is a massive, massive problem. And now there's another research that came out from the Oxford Internet Institute that looked at the data in about 81 countries around the world, that studied the data in 81 countries, and so that both the government and private firms are pouring millions and millions and millions of dollars into what they call cyber troops to spread misinformation, right? And if you look at just the United States, where we are, for example, over half of the adults get the news from platforms like Facebook, YouTube, and so on, because there's a big distrust now in what's seen as the traditional media. So people rather go in the Facebooks, the TikToks, the YouTubes, and so on to get their information. Well, because of that distrust, now that has actually created a gap, which is allowing people that are good at manipulation to fill that gap, right? Again, there is a big distrust of traditional media. People stepping away from the traditional media to go towards the YouTubes and social media and so on to get their news. And now people utilizing that gap. And so today we live in a world where manipulative content is thriving. Fake news across the board. All right. And on the other side, now fake news has become one of the greatest accusation. Donald Trump being a guy who loves to use that word. Fake news here, fake news there. Fake news all over the place. So, so media manipulation is definitely nothing new. But the fact that today we have social media is just supercharging the problem, amplifying the problem. So it's no longer just one entity and one avenue controlling the narrative. Social media essentially today is opening the world to almost anybody, right? So people now have the ability to create a following and across all different platforms, but without the same the constraints that used to exist. It was an environment that was reserved for a selective few, but not anymore. So the bottom line of this problem is that we need to get to a place in an understanding that the media does not just report on reality, but the media is actively constructing the reality. Let's keep that in mind, that the media is not just reporting on reality, but actively constructing that reality. So by understanding that is the first crucial step in really reclaiming our perception of how things are going. It is absolutely critical, because if you just consume everything blindly, the joke is on us ultimately. All right, so let's look at the tactics. There's so many tactics, but I'm only going to focus on 5 tactics because we're running short on time. 5 tactics that the media utilizes, and then on the next show, and I'm going to end up there, and then on the next show, we're gonna pick it up from there, and then we're gonna go into the roadmap and the guide on how to decode this, because otherwise we might be here for over an hour. So in terms of the tactics, there's 5 tactics. All right. The first tactics is sensationalism that the media utilizes. The second one is strategic omission. All right, and selective reporting, and I'll explain them. The third tactic is called framing, the way you position things, the way you control the narrative lens. All right. The fourth tactic is using biased language and emotional appeal. And the fifth tactic is disinformation campaigns. Those are really 5 tactics that I've decided to highlight when it comes to media manipulation. All right. So let's look at the first one. What do I mean by sensationalism? Well, think of it as the media shouting "fire, fire" if you were in a crowded movie theater, for example. You shout "fire." Well, can you just visualize the panic that would ensue? You sitting down watching what's one of the latest movies out in the movies now, Jurassic Park, and then you hear "fire." I mean, boy, the chaos that will ensue. That is what sensationalism is trying to cause. It is using shocking stories and over the top language. So not really focusing on accuracy, but just wanting to grab people's attention right away. All right. So especially in this 24/7 news cycle where we're bombarded with news left and right, people want to get the clicks. And so they will do anything possible to try to get your attention. That is what we call sensationalism. That is used quite a lot. And when it comes to the political arena, that is often combined with scare tactics. Scare tactics are a fantastic way to create sensationalism. Again, I'm talking about the tactics here so that you know what's happening when you're watching the news, and hopefully you can filter that in this lens and you can recognize what's happening in the news stories that you read. So by constantly having a high emotional state, that can really distort our understanding. And so we start, focusing on dramas and things like that instead of focusing on substance. So that's sensationalism. Strategic omission and selective reporting is what I would call the half-truth. So something is presented, it's not a lie, but you omit something strategically, right? So you present just part of it, a half-truth. And that is a big tactic that the media uses. So that strategic omission or selective reporting, if you will, is just creating a bias, right? And leaving out certain things. So for this, it's all about what is not said. And so media outlets or even social media will just highlight one part of a story, or take a complex political issue and only highlight a portion and not everything, right? You omit certain, say, for example, provocation or anything like that on one side, or you give a lopsided view of trying to blame somebody. So when you're watching this, you might think that you're getting the full story, because if that's your favorite news outlet, if you're just a lover of Fox News or anything else, you think you're getting the whole news, but you're actually not. You're just getting part of that. So, here it's all again about shaping what the public deems important, right? By presenting that and focusing on certain aspect, it is shaping our sense of what is actually important with the issues. And so we start emphasizing what the media wants us to emphasize without really having the whole other side of the issue. So that's what it is. And that ties into the next tactic, which is framing. Framing is all about just how the information is presented, the angle or the viewpoint. So it's connected to what I said before. Because, again, how an issue is framed will dramatically impact public opinion. You could have a KKK extreme right rally in Charlottesville, for example. And then some media outlets decide to frame that as free speech instead of a public safety threat. You have a president that will tell you have good people marching in that march, right? So the way you frame an issue will create very different reactions to that same story. The fourth tactic, emotional appeals and biased language. This is about what we call the persuasion playbook. So because words are very powerful, the way we combine phrases and words will clearly guide our feelings. Again, words will elicit strong feelings. Think about an issue, whether it's the Gaza conflict, whether it's something happening in Sudan or what's not. Think of calling people freedom fighters versus calling them terrorists. Depending on how you frame and how you call them, the perception will be totally different. Look at Donald Trump's bill. Are you going to call it a tax relief? Or are you going to call it a tax cut for the rich? All right. So the language here can create a lot of bias and create a lot of emotional appeal. And the fifth tactic is disinformation campaigns. So in this age in which we live, I mean, you will have deliberate attempts to spread false and misleading information just to sway public opinion with specific political goals many times. Remember I talked about Fox? How Fox was sued after the election because they deliberately advanced misleading information to sway public opinion and influence their ratings, keep the ratings high, and obviously with a bottom line incentive. But unfortunately, this disinformation campaigns, for many times people who engineer them in a political arena, you have to understand that the aim is often to create social divide, or at least deepen the existing social divide. Is to create, erode the trust in institutions, or just create so much chaos that at the end we don't even know what to believe. Now, I believe it's Steve Bannon, in the Donald Trump circle that say you just keep pumping information, so at the end people won't even know what is true, or will just totally disengage. So that is one of the tactics. Brothers and sisters, I want to end here for today because we've gone on for quite a while, so 51 minutes already. Just as a quick recap, we talked about media manipulation. I started telling you about the problem, and I went very quickly on the tactics being utilized because I want to spend a lot of time on how to decode it and how to fight it and how to control it. That will be the bulk of our conversation, and that's what we'll touch upon on the following show. So make sure you come back so we can continue on this very, very important topic. For all of us that are involved in this activism arena, it is important to understand the strategy of propaganda, how to combat that, and how to utilize that to advance truthful causes. Thank you for your support. As has become the norm, when we close, we like finishing with a quote. And the quote that I will use today is a quote from none other than Chihombori Kwao, because we talked about African presidents just coming and sitting in front of Trump and begging for help and so on. Well, Ambassador Chihombori Kwao says, "You've given up your finances, your military, and natural resources. What power do you have left? How can a leader run a country without control of the building blocks of the country?" Indeed. Global Pack Nation, we should stop just giving away the building blocks of our country. We have everything we need to become strong and get to the point of dictating the terms of negotiation. But you need the power to do that. Respect is not asked for. Respect is grabbed. We have the strength and resources to do that, whether it's in the Caribbean, Africa, Latin America, African American communities in the U.S. We have what it takes to change the narrative. Thank you very much for your support. Let me know what you think about today's topic. If you think that I'm totally wrong, let me know in your comments. If you've not subscribed, let me ask you to please subscribe. Only takes a second. Let me ask you also to share this content to people in your network that you feel would benefit from this. If you're already part of this community, thank you very much. Without you, we cannot do it. On that note, until next time, peace be with you. Asante sana, which means thank you very much in Swahili. This was Tony Mfumusimba Kwamba Mangumbu. Remember, we are very beautiful people, a strong people, a capable people. Don't let anybody convince you otherwise. And more importantly, we are the Global Pack. So until next time, let's get to work. Thank you very much.